Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. I'm Temi. I'm a PhD researcher and a reader. And on my channel, I talk about my life as a PhD student, and I also talk about books. Today, I'm going to be talking about the books I read in August, or my August monthly roundup. And we're just going to get into it. So in August, I read 7 books, which is actually a huge surprise for me because I wasn't expecting to do that at all. I had only planned in my mind, if you watched my last video, that I was only going to read 4 or 5, but I received a galley, an e-arc from NetGalley, and I also received I also read 2 shorter books. So I think that's why I was able to read a lot more than I was expecting. If I look at my StoryGraph stats, I read 6 books. I had an average rating of 4.21 on my books read in August, and I actually read predominantly fiction. So I read 60% of those books were fiction and the rest were nonfiction, which is surprising to me, again, because I typically read more nonfiction than fiction. August, like July, was another pretty solid banger of a month. I think most of the books that I gave were 4 stars or above, and I actually gave 2 5 stars. So yeah, I guess I'm having a really good late summer. July and August were really good, which is great because most of the reading that I've been doing throughout the year, particularly with fiction, just hasn't been that satisfying. I haven't been eating as much as I would like. So I guess it was a pretty good month. I don't know, I'm really surprised by that, which is weird because I'm actually recording this at the end of August. And if I look back, yeah, I have had a really good reading month. So I'm going to start by talking about my first book, which was a NetGalley arc from Melville House Publishing, and it is the Italy Letters by Vicky Now. I read this on my ebook on my Kindle, and this was recently published. I think it was published in August. This is what feels like autofiction, but I don't think it is, about a Vietnamese American woman who is writing a series of letters, very stream of consciousness style, to her friend, who is another woman who's based in the UK and or Italy. We don't have many character names here. We have an unnamed main character, and we have an unnamed sort of not antagonist, but secondary protagonist, who is this female character that the unnamed main character is talking about. This book really surprised me. I was really taken in by the blurb and sort of the synopsis, which is as follows. The Italy Letters is a mesmerizing account of an achingly sensual love affair from a queer Vietnamese novelist and cult favorite. It's a slim, powerful shot of literary fantasia. 1 second, sneeze. Okay, now the sneezes are coming. Way to make me look like a liar body. A powerful shot of literary fantasia from one of America's best kept secrets. Long a cult favorite, visionary writer Vicky Now weaves an unforgettable and highly distinctive story of a love affair suffused with longing, erotic passion, and heartbreak, all while painting a picture of the gritty underside of Las Vegas. So yeah, I was totally hooked by this. And then in the first couple of pages, I felt a bit of discomfort while I was reading. It's pretty fast-paced. We don't get a lot of exposition. We're just sort of jumped right into it, into the stream of consciousness style. Which can be very propulsive, I found, and it's sort of easy to really rapidly read and go through and not actually take in what's being said. I found that the tone and the register of the book is really darkly comic. There's lots of sections that made me laugh out loud, even though the content was quite bleak. So, for example, the writer talks a lot about her clitoris, and this really reminds me of Audre Lorde's The Use of the Erotic, not because she's talking particularly about sex, although the unnamed main character in the letters is, but because in this book, the unnamed main character is really talking about the way that this sexual desire she has for her friend who may or may not feel the same way, although we do know that the friend, who is also unnamed, is heterosexual and in a marriage with a man, is really powerful in how it's driving sort of her every waking moment. We hear a lot about the juxtaposition of being a so-called seemingly professional, successful writer and the economic instability that that can also bring, particularly when you don't come from wealth, particularly when you are an immigrant, you come from an immigrant background. This was really, this resonated with me, not because I'm a full-time writer, but just because I'm someone who does write for a living as an academic. Your job is writing, and that requires a large economic sacrifice. It's something I talk about in my other videos, about my PhD vlogs, and also the way that you could be having some of the most successful moments of your career and then also thinking about how you're going to be making rent. There's also this tension between the unnamed main character's mother and themselves. The whole reason why they are in Las Vegas is because their mother is ill. It's not really clear what the illness is. I think it might be cancer. I can't remember. And there's this tension definitely that is written about their relationship, about the dependency of being an immigrant child, of being a first-generation Vietnamese American, and what that means to have to parent your parents and have to be the go-between. And I know like Ocean Vuong has discussed this in their novel, although I didn't really love that. And I think and now does a really good job about talking about that in a way that isn't so, for lack of a better word, stereotypical. Like there's no discussion of like your smelly, like immigrant food in the lunch room here. I feel like if people were just sort of like to go through and read this book, like they would kind of write it off as just sort of like, oh, that was a bit of a weird random thing. But when you do a close analysis and a deep reading of it, then it really takes you back by how poignant and how poetic some of the parts are. So for example, there's something I like highlighted a lot of sections in this book. In one section, that I really loved about this really short, powerful novel is that it really does talk about love and the ways that love tests you, right? And so it writes, the best love is unexpected. You don't just pick someone and cross your fingers, it'll work out. You meet them by fate, and it's an instant connection, and the chemistry share is way above your head. You just talk and notice the way their lips curve when they smile, or the color of their eyes, and all at once you know you're either lucky or screwed. And that really touched me, and I think you get a lot of this sort of poignant, poetic writing in the Italy letters. And this is, so that's something that really surprised me. I gave it a 4-star, and I really enjoyed it. Moving on to the next book I read, which is one I have here. And I'm really excited this month because I actually have like books that I can physically touch because I've been doing some book shopping at the library and because I have a Kindle, whereas I feel like my last couple of book videos I've just sort of been like, here are the books I've read. So the book I read most recently is Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo, a Nigerian author. This book is an experience. I know I'm late to this book. It's been on my TBR. I'm trying to read my TBR over the next couple of months. So please don't recommend any books to me because I'm pretending I'm blind to new books, which is very difficult because actually The Republic, which is a Nigerian literary magazine and a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous magazine. It's not just literary, but phenomenal magazine. Just did their sort of like summer books. I'm ignoring it, but you should check it out. So yeah, this novel, Ayobami, the writer that you are, because excuse me, I was not prepared for the roller coaster of emotions that I was going to go on reading this book. It's so good. If people don't know what this book is about, it is a story of marriage, of a Nigerian marriage between Yejide and Akinyele, I believe. Akinyele is the husband, Yejide is the wife. In Nigerian culture, of which I am from, it is very normalized for the husband to have multiple wives. It's sort of seen as a very traditional thing, perhaps more progressive or younger generations might not make that choice. that is sort of the setting of the story that we find ourselves in here. Also, sort of in the context of the late 80s uprisings in Nigeria and the political turbulence of which Babylon, UK is responsible for. This story is, again, a story about love, but it's also a story about motherhood, about yearning. I wasn't expecting to relate to the character so much because the main character, the woman Yejide, is someone who grew up without a mother. My mother passed away 8 years ago now, and so I really felt parallels between the sort of yearning and this loss that's in your life, and how that sort of ripples down and touches and shapes different moments and experiences that you are catch you unawares. I gave this 5 stars because it was so gorgeously written. I inhaled the story. This story made me feel really proud to be Yoruba, which is a tribe in Nigeria, one of the several tribes, along with Igbo and Hausa and several others. It made me feel such pride because I learned so much about the language and the spirituality and the cultural practices, and I'm so grateful to Ayobami for doing that in this book. But at the same time, it also made me feel a lot of shame and sadness about not knowing about my culture and not really having my mom to sort of like tap up and ask those questions. It's a searing story, really about the lens that someone in particular, a Nigerian woman, Yejide, will go to bear children, and sort of the ways that they come up against cultural traditions. They come up against the expectations of the mother-in-law, the father-in-law, of their own sort of like second and third mothers. Mummy is sort of the term that they call them. And yeah, what that means when you can or cannot have children, how that is implicated in the culture that you're part of and the Yoruba culture that Yejide is part of. There's some deceit and treachery between her and her husband, Akinyele, and his brother, and this sort of like, lack of a better terminology, love triangle presents itself. And just the ending took me by surprise. I don't know why I didn't see that coming. The ending, there's so much grief in this book. Trigger warning for child abuse, for child loss. But it's written with such care and tenderness, and Ayobami tackles these issues with such a deftness of their writing. The last thing I'll say is that Ayobami really writes for Nigerians, and what I mean by that is that you have this tendency, I feel sometimes, when discussing Own Voices writing or Own Voices books or whatever, such a fun age, thinking of you, where it's really centering the white gaze and sort of that perspective of knowing that white people are going to be reading and having to explain and underline and underscore what this means and why it's important. And Ayobami does not do that. Ayobami writes for Nigerians first and foremost, and because of that, I can only imagine the pushback that she may have faced in publishing in order to do so, because this was published. This is published by Alfred A. Knopf, and it was published in 2017. So this is pre-Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, Summer of Black Squares, right? So yeah, I'm really thankful to Ayobami for this book, and I'm really looking forward to reading their second book, which is A Spell of Good Things, because this was just phenomenal. The next book we will talk about is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. I've had this for a really long time, and I just never have gotten to it because Baldwin makes me depressed. You people who are like, oh my God, Baldwin is so amazing, like, seek help. Seek help. Because I cannot go through what I went through reading this book again. I read Baldwin's other book, I can't remember. Is it Go Tell It on the Mountain? The sort of like memoir, auto-fiction book about his life. depressing. Depressing. I don't like reading about black pain. I don't want to read that. I don't want to touch that shit. This is white pain. This is white people's business, okay, which I love that Baldwin was doing, but also depressing, raggedy. And you know who's raggedy? David. I'm going to read basically from my storygraph review here because I think it's easier. I start off by saying, David, you raggedy ass bitch. Because if anyone knows or has read this book, you will know that this is a heartbreaking story of romance and homophobia and lies and deceit and not living in your truth in 1950s Paris. I was reading about this book, and I know that James Baldwin received some pushback because the main character of this book is David, who is a white man. And this was published in 1956. I have the Penguin sort of classic fiction, modern classics edition here. Here. I don't love this cover, to be honest. I don't love this cover. If anyone doesn't know, this is a story about David, who's a young American in 1950s Paris. He's waiting for his fiancée to return from vacation in Spain. David meets Giovanni, who's a handsome Italian barman, and then the two were drawn into a really intense love affair. It's so depressing. It's so sad. Like, I hated it so much. Sorry, I'm just looking for my review here. So yeah, we're not Team David. We're not Team David. I don't think we're Team anyone here. Are we Team Helen? Helen is David's fiancée, his betrothed. Guillaume, Jacques, Team none of them. This story is so sad and it's so violent. Baldwin writes about the cruelty of whiteness and compulsual heterosexuality so easily, and I talk about the cruelty of whiteness because David is quite cruel. He's quite selfish. The violence in this book isn't sort of like the brutal physicality of violence, but rather the quotidian everydayness of such hegemonic violence that is enacted upon people who are outside of the norm. And so here we're talking about homosexuality, right? As I said before, I really love that Baldwin, as a black writer, is writing white characters because really, speaking about like Baldwin as a writer here, black people and other people of color are, I would say, anthropologists of whiteness. We live in whiteness as understanding what it means to be othered every single day, right? So we really understand how whiteness works. And so we're also really aware of what it means to sort of like attempt to perform and assimilate into whiteness, but also how whiteness operates within its own sort of like community, for example. And so I think Baldwin does a great job of explaining that through David's behaviors and how he treats Helen, how he treats the people he comes up against, how he treats the people he sees and meets in Paris, and how ultimately he places himself first, even when it causes him pain to do so. I love how in this book Baldwin allows the reader to build sympathy. I'm not going to say empathy because I don't feel empathy with David. And build this sympathy with David's character because ultimately David also is a victim of white cis patriarchy, but he just wields this to Giovanni and Helen, his betrothed, and that other babe that he sleeps with, whose name I've forgotten. Something I want to say that for me, I actually imagined Giovanni as being non-white character. I don't know why, but I think it's something about the way that probably he was treated by David and also treated just by Paris in general. And so I think it's something to do with the power differentials within the characters. I believe that this happened, not that this exact story, but I can see and I believe that there are many stories like this in 1950s Paris and 1950s all over the place, and probably honestly still now, depending on where the people live. So yeah, it really feels like a true retelling of sort of like the lives of gay men in that historical period. Phenomenal writing, great storytelling, but depressing as fuck, and I don't want to read any more like that. So the next book that we'll talk about is The Other Significant Others. This is Reimagining Life with Friendship in the Center by Rhaina Cohen. This is a nonfiction book. It is I would say, nonfiction narrative book published in 2024 by Macmillan, doing my PhD. And so this is a book that I have been really looking forward to read and discuss for a while. I actually was talking to Katha Rout about this, and I think they did a book club because they're also really interested in these topics. This book was a bit of a letdown for me, and I really want to emphasize that I think this is a letdown because I've read so much of the academic literature on friendship, on relationality. For anyone who doesn't know in general what this book is, this book, The Other Significant Others, the synopsis reads, "Why do we assume relationships are more important than friendships? What do we lose when we expect a spouse to meet all our needs? And what can we learn about commitment, love, and family from people who put deep friendship at the center of their lives?" In The Other Significant Others, NPR's Rhaina Cohen invites us into the lives of people who have defied convention by choosing a friend as a life partner. And so I'll stop there. And so, yeah, this book for me just didn't really, I think, hit as I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be more about, and this is going to sound ridiculous, I thought it was going to be more about friendship. Hold that thought, my battery's dying. Okay, we're back. Yeah, I thought it was going to be more of a discussion of what it means in general. So what it does to society, what it does to our understandings of relationships, of intimacy, when we center friendship, and that's not quite what it is. Instead, this is a comprehensive, qualitative account of the ways that people, mainly white and USian people, have formed close relationships that typically would be reserved for romantic partners. So they center friendships in the way that you would typically center a romantic partner. So Cohen does a great job of sort of describing these types of relationships and how they brush up against compulsory heterosexuality and sort of like other norms. As I said, I was interested in this because it is sort of like a book length read on friendship and intimacy outside of sex and romance, but I was really left lacking because there just wasn't, for me, any theoretical or conceptual intervention. And what I mean by that is, if you take what we understand as friendship and what that means about relationships and behaviors, what does that mean for our theoretical understanding of friendship and relationality to humans in a sociological sense, if friendship is placed at the center in the way that romantic relationships are? That's not what this book is. This book is rather using thick data, descriptive accounts of people from interviews, many people that Rhaina interviews, to sort of describe and provide a detailed account of the ways that people have different relationships. So, there's these two men who are super, super close, and they spend a lot of time in this book sort of unpacking the ways that people, mistake them for being gay, or like can't understand why this male friend is so important to them, and sort of the issues they have come into when they introduce a girlfriend and they tell the girlfriend that, hey, so-and-so is really important to me, and not just like as a best friend, right? This is sort of my life partner. So it was interesting, and I think that my disappointment in it isn't because of a lack of writing capability or research from Cohen, but rather because I do have expertise in this area, and I guess I was looking for something quite specific. I don't know if it's actually marketed as an academic text. I think it's probably not because of Cohen's background and relationship with NPR. I will say that, though, I do hope, or something I've noticed from books that are from reporters and not academics, and I know that line can be blurry, is I just wish that reporters engage more with the theory and conceptualizations and less on reportage. But again, if you're a reporter, then that reportage is what your bread and butter is and what you're interested in. So yeah, I gave this 3 stars, and I think this was my lowest rated book of August. The next book, we're also going to talk about another nonfiction book, but this is memoir, and it is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. I talked about this a lot on my Instagram. I'm doing sort of like Instagram story reviews on the go on my Instagram. I find that really nice and helps me like think about the book, and also really help with my reviews. So yeah, this is Carmen Maria Machado. I read this because, and I'm going to talk about it, I know you're going to be like, stop being obsessed, but because Vanessa and Angelica Villarreal talked about it in their book Magical Realism. I think they are scholar friends, and so when I had seen this book In the Dream House referenced a few times in Magical Realism, I was like, okay, I've got to read that next. This is a memoir from Carmen. It's a account of a relationship gone bad, a lesbian relationship gone bad, and a bold dissection of the mechanisms and cultural representations of psychological abuse. It traces the full arc of a harrowing relationship with a charismatic but volatile woman. And in this book, Machado struggles to make sense of how what happened to her shaped the person she was becoming. I have to say that this is such an inventive style of memoir. I don't have the book because I got it from my library, so I have sadly returned it, but I think I might purchase this, try and find it secondhand, because I think the writing style of this, there's just so much to learn, for lack of a better word, about craft, about how you tell the story in memoir writing that is inventive, that is new. It's such an inventive style of memoir. There's the sort of like choose your own ending aspect to it, which I thought was just so brilliant, and also something about I think the inner child that maybe Carmen is talking about in this memoir. Again, something in this book really reminds me of Christina Sharpe. If you don't know, I'm obsessed with Christina Sharpe. She is the writer of Ordinary Notes, which is a phenomenal account of Black lives after the wake. And also of Catherine McKittrick, who's another Black scholar, Canadian scholar, and their use of endnotes and writing in these sort of snapshots and short, succinct bites, how I describe it. In this book, In the Dream House, what I really loved was the reoccurring types of dream house diary entries. It doesn't feel right to call this book like chapters. It feels very personal. They feel like diary entries, and in some diary entries the style and the form was the same, so us as a reader, we sort of knew what to expect. We knew the pacing and the cadence of that sort of chapter. So I think one of them is like Dream House is Deja Vu. Machado also, like Vicky Now, has a way of writing that feels like poetry. I think you could argue that some of these Dream House entries are poetry. In general, this book is a really harrowing read and a difficult read of lesbian domestic abuse. Some of the accounts that Machado talks about really shook me to my core. Again, there was a shock ending, a happy shock ending that I wasn't expecting, and I sort of was like grasping at my chest and breathing heavily when I was reading this, because I don't know why, but I just wasn't expecting this ending. My only critique, I guess, of the book is that I wish that there was a bit more engagement with what I'm calling like the I, which is weird for a memoir, but basically what I say by that, like, who is Carmen and what is her positionality, particularly when, like, towards the end of the book, the form really kind of switches from memoir to what I would say is like nonfiction essay, almost journalism. These are the sections that are more on sort of queer domestic abuse and the literature and the legal cases and the ways that women were not seen as being actually being able to be proponents of domestic abuse, particularly if you were a butch lesbian. And so I have to say that there's something with like white Latinas who have sort of a way, and I would say also in general, just non-Black people of color have a way of sort of invoking critical race analysis, and then also not positioning themselves or their characters within that analysis, so they're very distant from it. I'm a Black feminist theorist, so Black feminism is really is of the idea that your personal is political, and so you have to use, you know, as a Collins theorist, your standpoint from which to understand your location and the experiences that you're having. And so when I see people talking about critical race issues, making a critical race analysis and not locating themselves with the analysis of what it means for their position or their location in society, I find that a little bit confusing, and I find it a little bit disappointing, honestly. But like overall, this is a really superb book. I think it really pushes the boundary of what we consider to be memoir. There are really exquisite chapters that, as I said, I think I'm going to purchase so I can come back to it. There's a particular line, which is something like, a kick of anxiety in your lungs. How visceral is that, right? And I think that line is written in one of the Dream House entries where they're talking about sort of the daily emotional and sort of psychological abuse that they found. So that is the Dream House. Whew, we are almost there. I think the last book, oh no, let's talk about the book that I DNF'd. Again, I talked about this on stories. This is going to be another nonfiction book. This is going to be another PhD read, and this is called One in a Millennial, on friendship, feelings, fangirls, and fitting in by Kate Kennedy. This was published this year by Macmillan. I DNF'd this. When did I DNF this? I DNF'd this at like 20% in. I really thought this was going to be something that it wasn't. When I saw One in a Millennial on friendships, I was like, okay, yes, another book on what it means to be a woman and a millennial and what that means about friendship. No, this is really a memoir, and I simply do not know who Kate Kennedy is.
I hate to say it. I hope I don't sound ridiculous. I don't know who this man is. I mean, he could be walking down the street. I wouldn't know a thing. Sorry to this man.
Or have an interest in them. So that was like a large reason why I just stopped reading, because I think for memoir, for me, I have to be interested in a little bit about who you are, your position in society, what you have to say, your experiences. Kate Kennedy is regular white girl from middle America. I am simply not interested. I stopped at 30%. And yeah, I just didn't care enough about the opposite person perspective. And also in the book, it also turned out that by 30%, they were really holding on to like the framing of millennial as sort of meaning making in their life and their identity, like holding on to the demographic framing of millennial as doing something for how they see themselves. And I am troubled by that, because millennial, Gen Z, Gen X, these are terms typically used by marketers for segmenting, and so I feel confused as to why this would really shape your identity. No shade if it does. I just am not interested to read about that. So that's a book I DNF'd. And then finally, the last book that we will talk about is Last Book, Best Book. I don't know, another 5-star. It is actually a reread for me. Is it the second time? And it is Kindred by one of my favorite science fiction authors, Octavia E. Butler. I'll put it here. This book has no right being so damn good. And again, how inventive to write this. Octavia E. Butler paid attention to what was happening in society, and she wrote about futures, dystopian futures, as she foresaw what was going to happen. In Kindred, this is actually my first book club pick for a book club that I'm hosting here called Kindred Collective. If you're in the area, then check it out. Kindred is a story about ancestors in the South in the US and contemporary folks living in the 70s, and the connection between perhaps a black person and a white person because of slavery. So we flip back and forth with our main character Dana and the antagonist Rufus, who we learn very quickly is Dana's ancestor, and obviously everything that means for a white man to be your ancestor, right? When I read this a couple of years ago for the first time, I found it incredibly difficult to read. The way that Butler describes the violence of the of the lives of the slaves in the South, in Maryland, on the Maryland plantation, was just too much. I've read a bit of sort of the neo-slave literature. Again, it's something that I find very difficult to read because as much as this is a retelling, it is also history. And as someone who would have been a slave if I was alive back then, and I am someone who is not, as far as I know, a descendant of slavery, it is very difficult to read that, whether it's fiction or if it's historical accounts from the archive. It is painful. And so the first time I read it, I remember wincing through it. I was so compelled by the story and the world that Octavia builds. Octavia is phenomenal in building worlds, in being able to put the reader and being able to have them hear the sounds, smell the tastes, the feeling, the tension, again, because I have a relationship to Blackness the same way that the main character Dana has. It was very easy for me to feel the anxiety and the fear and the terror that Dana obviously would be feeling, you know, unknowingly going back into the 1800s. I haven't even given you a synopsis. If you don't know what Kindred's about, it is a great book. So basically it goes between 1976 and 1850. Something happens where Dana is taken back into time, where she is face to face with Rufus, her ancestor. And the book takes us through this relationship of going backwards and forwards between the 1970s and the 1850s and the 1800s, and also the relationship between Dana and Rufus. There's a link between them, obviously, and that link shapes why Dana is coming back and forwards. I don't really have much to say about this book other than it's phenomenal. It is great storytelling, and it's very, very powerful. The things that the reason why I chose this book for the book club is because it's about kinship, and it's about kinship, I think, not also in the genealogical sense, but also I'm thinking about kinship as community and how we have to give to people in our community even if we don't fucks with them, right? So if we're thinking about collective liberation, how do we pour into others' cups even if we're like, I don't really like you? That's sort of the theme of my book club, and so I thought that was a really great book to start with because Rufus is a slave owner and Dana is related to him, and obviously in the title Kindred we see Butler sort of tease out that relationship between being related to people who want to do you harm, whether that is, again, a blood relationship or otherwise. And yeah, the second time reading this book, I found it a lot easier to get through, thankfully. I think because I knew it was coming. It wasn't my first time. But yeah, just a really great book. I think it's something that I'll return to again and again, especially if I'm looking just for a really solid science fiction read. So those are all the books that I read in August. I had a great reading month. I have talked about my September TBR on my Instagram. I potentially might do a short video on my September picks and why I picked them, but I might not. I hope you enjoyed that. Please let me know if you've read any of those books. And other than that, I will see you in my next video. Bye.